Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Comics Rot Your Brain, the show where screenwriters talk about the comic books that we love, mostly from the 1980s. I'm one of your hosts, I'm Steven Bagatourian.
And I'm your other host, Christopher Derrick.
And Chris, today we talked about a comic from the 1980s that is one of the wilder comic books that has ever existed. It is an incredibly odd book called AZTEC ACE, written by the legendary Doug Moench and drawn by Mike Hernandez and Dan Day, at least the issues that we read. And boy, is this an insane story.
I'm going to tell you right now, this is the most psychedelic comic we have ever read. And, and I'll say this. And I'll go out on a limb. This will be the most psychedelic comic that we will ever read, too.
Bold words. Yeah, bold words, ladies and gentlemen.
No, they're bold, yes. But I got to let you know what I feel.
So what is this? What is AZTEC ACE? In a nutshell, AZTEC ACE is the story of a guy named Ace. Traveling between the ancient world and the 23rd century, Ace, along with his pupil, Bridget Chronopoulos, and his navigator, the floating disembodied head of Sigmund Freud, they struggle to save their own dimension from time paradoxes created by an enemy who is the mysterious Nine Crocodile. And this is an unbelievably surreal time travel story that is mind-bending and genre-exploding. This is a wildly ambitious and incredibly hard-to-follow story that we had a blast reading it and talking about it. But before we jump into the episode proper, it would probably be best to give everyone a little context on Doug Moench. For those of you who do not know the writer of AZTEC ACE, Doug Moench is one of the most legendary writers in the history of mainstream comic books. And Chris, do you want to set the table for everyone on just who Doug Moench is? And by the way, for those of you wondering, that is how you pronounce his name, Doug Moench. It rhymes with bench. It's just spelled in a way where you may not think that. But Chris, who is Doug Moench?
Okay, so Doug started off his career in the 1970s. He wrote for those Warren magazines like Eerie and Creepy before he got plucked by Roy Thomas to work at Marvel, where he first wrote the definitive run on Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu, and then he was known for co-creating a Moon Knight, and then he did a long and very memorable run on Batman for DC Comics.
Yes, that is right. And a lot of people consider Doug Moench to be the signature writer of the Bronze Age at Marvel Comics. Along with Roy Thomas, there was no one else writing more comics per pound than Doug Moench. For about a decade or so, he was just doing an unreal amount of work. He was a supremely prolific writer, crazy workload, and he covered a wide variety of genres and material. And, AZTEC ACE was sort of his opportunity to jump in on the action of the indie comics movement of the 80s. And as a lot of other pros were jumping into the indie world, Doug Moench took this idea for AZTEC ACE over to Cat Ironwood and Dean Mullaney, the publishers at Eclipse Comics, who we've talked about this show before. Go back and check out our episode on Saber. But Eclipse Comics was really ahead of their times and progressive when it came to creator ownership. And that was a very smart spot for them to, for Doug Moench and his collaborators to take AZTEC ACE. And you can see they were given an unreal, extraordinary amount of latitude with this story as we talk about. And I don't know, Chris, do you have any memories of this discussion that we had about AZTEC ACE?
This was just one of the wildest books we absolutely ever read. I think the people over at Amazing Heroes summed it up best. They said, this series is a strange cross between Doctor Who and the Illuminati trilogy. And I'm going to tell you right now, it might have been better if I had some mushrooms when I was reading this, because I might have been able to understand it a little more. Now, here's the thing. I'm not saying people shouldn't read this book. It's very compelling. As soon as you start reading and start putting the pieces together in your head, it starts to become more and more fascinating. Like, the thing that I remember the most Steve, and this is by the time we got through those 3 issues, I actually wanted to read more because I thought it all started to fall into place.
Yes, I remember feeling the exact same way. It is such a head trip, but very much worthwhile. And, folks, when you hear our discussion, I think you'll realize what we're talking about right now. And our discussion really sort of mimics the experience of reading Aztec Ace, which really is like one big psychedelic trip. And although it's disorienting at times, it's incredibly worthwhile. And we hope you enjoy the discussion as much as we did.
And now let's get on to the show. We're just going to talk about issues 1, 2, and 3 today because I had my brain explode trying to read these books, and I'm sure Steve had the same reaction. But let's just jump into Aztec Ace. I don't even know what to say what this is. This is Steve. So I'm gonna let you say what
Yeah.
it is because I can't.
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
I can't.
This is a challenge. This is a challenge to describe, man. This is a fucking ambitious and utterly bizarre time travel series. And, in a way, man, like, I know we both have already talked about just what a challenging read Aztec Ace is. It's also really what I love about comic books because it is so insanely ambitious, and it is such a mishmash of genres and just so chock full of ideas that, like, you literally just cannot even imagine this being done in any other medium. I mean, yeah, you could think maybe it would be a super dense novel, but, like, really, like, there's something that feels very much like just the sheer weirdness of this thing feels like so pure to the comic book experience that, like, some of the only comparables I could think of for this, I think, would be something like The Adventures of Luther Arkwright, which Brian Talbot did,
Yeah.
over in the UK, and it also dealt with time travel in an incredibly dense and hyper, just novel and wildly ambitious story. And I feel like Aztec Ace is the closest thing to like a Luther Arkwright that I've seen from American comics, and it is a challenging read to say the least. I think we talked on the phone after we read the first issue, and we both were just like, holy shit, that was like an intense psychedelic drug trip. And it's going to be a tough one to describe on the show. So, all
Yeah,
right, let's try. Let's try though.
but,
You've
okay,
got
we'll try.
notes.
So, I look. I've got notes, but I don't even know if they're good. I mean, this. So this is what I'll say. This is a time travel story in the vein of Quantum Leap, where the lead character, Aztec Ace, whose name is Kaza, and he's not even Aztec, he's actually from the 23rd century, but you meet him back during the height of the Aztec Empire, where that's kind of his home base, where he is trying to stop time paradoxes from that,
Hmm.
like like whatever it's the 1200s or something like that AD in Mexico. And that's about all I can really say what the story is about, like on a broad sense,
Yeah,
on a,
yeah. Well,
I mean,
I think the quantum leap comparison, that's a good idea. The quantum leap comparison is something that at least that like people can kind of wrap their hands around a little bit if they're familiar with that show. But like this thing actually, like, it also says that it starts, or it says it began after an opening sort of prologue in Aztec times, which we can talk about in a second. It flashes forward to San Francisco 400 years later, and we see that our guy, the titular Aztec Ace, he is a private investigator in kind of a noir, kind of like hard boiled fashion in San Francisco 400 years after our opening. And he's a private investigator named T.A. Zek, which of
yeah,
course, if you rearrange those letters, is Aztec.
yeah,
And T.A. Zek is just hanging out in his office dealing with like noir private eye shit. But then we realize that there's actually a supernatural element to it, and he's literally got a demon in his office, and he's dealing with the ancient god Quetzalcoatl,
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
it's like supernatural. It's supernatural fucking film noir private eye shit combined with like Aztec time travel. It's like Doctor Who. It's like Doctor Who mashed up with
It
like,
is like
a
Doctor Who.
noir story,
It's totally
right?
like
Yeah,
Doctor Who. Yeah.
it's got a
Yeah.
very Doctor Who kind of thing to it. I mean, the whole thing starts with like an Aztec ceremony and Aztec sacrifices, and our main guy Aztec Ace hanging out with some woman in Aztec times, and then we've got this crazy, and she's like bathing with some naked servants in like a pond or in like a in just
Well, yeah, but
in
the thing,
it's
but the thing,
it's please you jump in.
okay, but the thing about it is that you meet him. He's in Aztec land, seen out of like Apocalypto kind of thing, and then and in his little sanctum, he has his time travel device, and which is called the Ace, and he's with this woman named Bridget Chronopolis, who he's and there's a paradox happening right now where he has to go back to the San Francisco time period to get this statue of a snake that he needs to help like complete this Aztec ritual that's happening that same night. And then it's
Right.
like so it's kind of flashing back to tell you how he first met Bridget, but it also wants to it's like the thing about this story this is we're gonna go over the place, like what,
Yeah.
no one can follow what we're saying because
Yeah. Yeah.
what this is this is a non-linear zigzagging story, and the plot
Yes.
line is going it's like doing these loop-de-loops in a way that I don't even think it makes sense to try to like the first 20 pages of this. I didn't even understand like the timeline, like what was
Right.
happening.
Well, it's
And then
very difficult. It's like almost impossible to kind of keep up with it. Like you just said, it's flashing back, but of course we actually mean it's flashing forward to San Francisco. But that's like a flashback in the sense that technically it happened chronologically for the
to
character
universe
before, but it's in
four,
the
but
future.
it's in the
Yeah.
future where we are, and it's just like I mean, I don't even know what he's trying to do by telling the story this way. But the thing is that the thing is you read it while you're reading it, and there's so much text on the page. It's on every page. It's probably. I mean, it's so dense. It's not even funny. But I'm not saying this to say that don't read it. And also, there's a collected version, which we'll put a link in. Hopefully, if this comes out at the right time, you can get it on Amazon. A collected thing, the first 15 issues hardback. But it's kind of like you read it, and you're kind of pulled through this fugue of a story that that it begins to make sense once they get out of like you understand what they're doing in San Francisco in the film noir story. You go, okay, I get that. This is some Sam Spade type of thing, and then they go back in time to go back to the time of the Aztec thing in the beginning, but then they gotta stop and they gotta and they're getting chased by these guys called like the Illuminati, and then they're gonna go to like the 1800 or they go back. I can't remember what happened. It's like I was taking notes. I was like, what's
Well,
going on?
wait, hold up. When they go back to Aztec times, though, let's not forget they actually witness a human sacrifice
Oh yeah,
when they go back to Aztec.
yeah, sacrifice. Yeah. Oh yeah, because the statue that they need from the 1940s helps the sacrifice work. But then they
Yes.
realize there's still more time paradox, and they got to go into the future to like the time, like this time of when Big Ben was supposed to strike, somewhere in the 1800s, I think, in London or something like that. And that's when they get. But now he's attacked in San Francisco by these minions called the Illuminati,
Hmm.
and I don't even know who they are necessarily are. What we find out later in issue 2 is they're like the minions of this guy named what's his name, like like Nine Crocodile, is that his name, who's from the future.
Yeah.
He's from the same future that Aztec Ace is
Right. Yeah.
from.
They call him Croc for short.
Yeah, they call him Croc. Yeah, yeah. And Aztec Ace name is really Kaza. It's not even Aztec Ace. It's
Right.
it's
Right.
so crazy.
Although they call him AC, or like the girl calls him
It's
Ace or
AC,
AC.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, and so when they're traveling through time to get to the Big Ben thing, the Illuminati are there. They're just like the villains of the piece, but they then solve that thing. They solve whatever they gotta do to make sure the clock strikes, and then they jump back in the space time flow, and they're being chased by the Illuminati again outside of the actual time stream, right? Or they're in the time stream and they're not like in a specific time period. And it's like this is when you begin to understand what this what like the level of ideas that Doug Moench has kind of like put together in this. Because you start seeing that again, like you said, it's like Doctor Who, and it's like the Time Lords are fighting him, and I mean, there's and it shows this dual page spread of
Yes,
like
the
how
world.
of like the world works in
Yeah.
five different
Yeah,
levels.
yeah, yeah. I've got that right here. Let me just read a little bit because we both were talking about this on the phone. Like, this was one of the kind of show stopping moments in the first issue. You get this double page spread of the world and the layers of Earth. And you see Earth is like in the center of 5 layers of a planet. And the text says, 5 worlds popped into view as Head froze the moment and Bridget was awed to that hair-raising silence, always following a gasp. I'd sucked air with prickled scalp, too, the first time I'd seen it. 5 concentric layer worlds tucked one inside the other, the ceiling of each studded with artificial suns, lighting the layer below. Oceans of air permitting travel from one world to the next, and even all the way down to the core. And the whole thing was a symbolic realization of time, space, history's mystery, and that which could unravel the whole ball of yarn. An onion with 5 layers and a nasty center, or 5 apples sharing the same worm-riddled core. And like, I gotta say, the lettering on this is a little confusing because I'm not even sure how you're supposed to read the lettering going around the planets here. But you can see here how dense it is. There's still a bunch more too. And Chris, it was funny because you texted me while we were reading this. You were like, "Are you sure this is a comic? It's kind of like an illustrated novel," which I can
Yeah.
understand. One would be forgiven for thinking that here. But this goes on to say, if you used key development demarcations to chop all of history into 5 eras, starting with the formation of the planet after the Big Bang and ending with my present of the 23rd century, each layer would correspond with one of those 5 eras. Appropriate people, albeit individuals always shrouded in mystery, inhabited each layer world. For example, Glenn Miller and Amelia Earhart lived on the 4th layer of 5 worlds. The core is a globe of water plied by gargantuan city ships, crewed by the Ebonati. This is all still on the double page spread, folks. This text is all one double page spread that I'm reading. But don't ask me how it came to be. I had other problems. And then we get into some dialogue, et cetera, et cetera. But
Well,
this is like, this is crazy. That's a light couple of pages in this comic, text wise.
yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, but it's crazy because because at the core, that's where like the guy named Nine Croc is hanging out, right? It's I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's like this book. You have to. I was telling you this the other day. And nobody has done this, but I really think somebody could do this. This book is so filled with ideas that somebody today could actually reboot this book, and and
Yeah,
and and and, and, and the story could be laid out in a way that that even the comic book connoisseur could read
yeah.
this, comprehend, because it takes like you know I think the only thing that is like shockingly confusing as this book, and mind you, it's like a 48-page book, right? It's 52
The
pages.
first issue, 52
Yeah,
page
50,
first
yeah,
issue.
52 pages. This is back in '83. Is that when this was?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a huge,
Around then.
and that's 52 comic pages, not just 52 pages like with ads like this. 52 actual pages of comic. It's
Yep.
probably like a 60-page issue or some shit like this. But it's kind of like Ronin. If you remember the Frank Miller's
Mm-hmm.
Ronin, where it's kind of
Yeah.
hard to grasp like what's going on, or maybe even that Promethea book that Alan Moore did with J.
Sure.
James III.
Sure.
Like, where you're trying to like you spend so much time trying to navigate, just like I mean, just to get a foothold on what the storytelling is and where you are and who the characters are, and then the minute you do, it whisks away. I mean, look, I like we go to something else. I mean, like I think it's important to talk about before we get anything. Is like who are the characters, right? So just real quick, the characters, like I said, there's Aztec Ace,
Mm-hmm.
There's his girl Friday. There's Bridget Chronopoulos, who's is his tentative love interest.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird how he like considers her. There's the head of Sigmund Freud, who's also called Tempest Fugit. This is like it's a disembodied head of Freud that operates the time machine called Ace. There's the villain of the piece named Nine Crocodile. There is Shackreen, who is Nine Croc's lover, the mother of his child, but also Ace's former lover. And there's
Mm.
someone named Quan who masquerades as Ben Franklin in the past, and he's trying to
Mm-hmm.
like cause time paradoxes. And then there's these creatures called the Night Gaunts, who are minions of Crocs from the 23rd century, 23rd century, or from the core. My thing is, I'm not quite sure if the Night Gaunts are the Illuminati. I couldn't figure that out,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
but the first three issues, those are the main characters. What they have to do, like the goal of this of what AZTEC ACE has to do is, like I said, it's like Quantum Leap. He's got to stop various time paradoxes, and the Illuminati and Nine Crocs. I think that they're causing time paradoxes so they can change history on some level to cause certain things to happen. Like this whole thing with Quan coming back as Ben Franklin, like Ben Franklin, like he solves this mystery of the first issue, right? Where he like he gets the snake, but then he realizes when he goes back and brings the snake to the ritual, the snake, not a snake, but it's like a snake statue. He realizes he's 12 seconds off, right? So and therefore he's got to go back again to save himself at the right time back in San Francisco to make sure he's kind of there at this. They always say that you don't want to see yourself, you know, at the same moment in time, like if you're time traveling, it will cause some weird time
Right.
paradox. But the thing is, he sees himself back in 1940. But the thing is, both those versions of AZTEC Ace don't belong then. So I think it doesn't cause a time paradox if you're playing by typical time paradox rules. I don't necessarily know. That's where this thing about this book is. It's a little. That's why you read. Now here's the thing about it, right? This is the thing. And look, we've both been saying this is kind of hard to comprehend. And we have notes and we're reading it and we're like, what is going on? But here's the thing that's interesting about this story, right? This is the thing that made me stop and go, oh, I see what he's doing. It's hard to get to this, but he's telling a love story. He's
Mm.
telling a love story in this because when AZTEC Ace, he gets like he has to sneak down, like when he comes back after solving a thing with Quetzalcoatl, and he goes back to that moment in time where he meets Bridget in the beginning of what he's at the little pond where where she's being bathed and stuff like that. He goes back there, and Quan is there's Ben Franklin, and Ben Franklin takes him captive, and they go down to meet like this guy named Nine Crocs like in the thing. And when he's down there, he meets that woman named Shackreen, right? And there's that moment where he escapes like Nine Crocs, and he's running through like one of those city ships at the bottom, and she saves him. But they have this like conversation, and it's a one of those loaded conversations that you kind of love the way it's written, where it tells you everything about the relationship, but without saying, "Hey, well, we were together for 10 years, whatever amount of blah." Like it's a very interesting way of like doing that, but that makes you go, "Oh, he's talking about this girl and she saves him." But there's this one line. I remember just one line I wrote down that tells me why this is a love story. Why what this whole doesn't matter what he's doing. The quantum leap time paradox is all about either to save Shackreen or to save Bridget. He says something like the loss of one woman made the salvation of history insignificant. Now that was a line that he
Mm.
said when he'd been stabbed by Quan and shot up by people, and he was like hanging out in like the gold meld to kind of like a month or so to like kind of like recuperate. Maybe it was longer
Yeah.
than that. And he was thinking about this is after he'd been saved by Shackreen, and he's having this conversation. He was like, "So what do I do? Do I go back and find Bridget, but she might be dead?" and it's like his whole motivation, yes, to stop these time paradoxes, but it's really, I'm gonna get back to to this woman that he loves, and that woman, when he goes back in issue 3, I'm jumping around all over the place because the story jumps all over the place, but but in issue 3, like, he goes to the pyramids like 1989, and he meets this woman who looks just like Bridget, but is
Right.
not her. And he's like, and it's like, again, it's like, oh, I'm doing stuff to save her now, because is this really her? Is this another version of her? Like, there's so much that I feel like I have to read some more issues of this at some time just to find out, like, really what the story is about. But it's like, you look, I mean, I've talked too much about the story.
No, it's quite okay, man. You're a better man than I. You're a better man than I, Chris, because you've managed to actually glean more from the story and retain it, and you're able to actually recapitulate and discuss this thing more, like, in a more organized fashion than I think I could. Because yeah, I was mystified by a lot of this. Hey folks, sorry for the interruption, but thank you so much for listening to the show. And Chris and I are just gonna elbow our ways in here briefly to tell y'all about our Patreon. And we're hoping that you'll consider very seriously signing up for our Patreon, which is only $2 a month. And for those $2 for 200 pennies a month, which these days is not even a cup of coffee at Starbucks. It's so little money to ask for, and we're gonna be offering you so much in return, but it would make a massive difference to us if you could sign up to be part of our show via the Patreon family, because we're going to be offering you in return 2 free one-shot episodes. Okay, they're not free, but 2 episodes that are exclusive to our subscribers on this Patreon platform. And these 2 one-shot episodes will feature Chris and I talking about books that we're not otherwise going to be discussing on the show at some length, and you will be surprised by some of these books that we cover. And that's not all, though. For the $2 a month, you're also going to get even more. Chris, what else do they get on Patreon?
You will be able to send us questions for the Q&A show that we have planned. It's more than one, but it's the first one will either be between seasons 1 and 2, or it'll be sometime in season 2, or be after. And something we'll figure out as we go along. But you'll be able to put questions in and ask us anything that we want to talk about. Who's our favorite indie pop, like comic publisher editor we should talk about.
Totally.
There's something like that. We'll see what happens. Just ask us any question you want about comics from the 80s, and we will get to that on the Q&A show. We will also open up to subscribers only an opportunity to suggest what books we should read and cover for subsequent seasons. So please subscribe. We would so much appreciate it, and you get a chance to participate in the show and help the show grow and help us decide what books that we're going to cover. Sure, there's a huge list, but there's always ones that we want to hear what the fans want to talk about as well. And so, Steve, what comic might you talk about during your one-shot episode?
Okay, there's a comic that I might want to talk about here that was an underground comic that was published way back in the good old days of the 1970s. It was considered part of the underground comics movement in a sense. The book is called The First Kingdom, and it came out from roughly the years 1974 to 1977, and it was a 24-issue, 768-page comic that took its creator, Jack Katz, 12 years to complete. And it was an underground comic, ostensibly, but it had very science fiction kind of concerns and vibes. It's a sci-fi fantasy story that opens in a post-apocalyptic world, and it's got all kinds of madness going on, gods and goddesses, apocalyptic sci-fi. It's a really epic story with an unbelievably dense and detailed art style. The comic had a lot of fans amongst other cartoonists at the time. Jack Katz was admired by such people as Will Eisner and Jim Steranko, and even Jack Kirby had very positive things to say about the work that Jack Katz was doing. And comic book historian R.C. Harvey, according to Wikipedia here, believed that Jack Katz was the first person in comics to pursue a personal vision at such length. And so he was quite a trailblazer. He was a unique figure in comics history. And I've never really looked at his work with any degree of detail, but I did happen to buy a complete set of The First Kingdom off eBay last year. It's a wonderfully bizarre looking underground comics. I've got all the floppies, and I'm excited to dive in, and I think I'd love to talk about it in one of these episodes here. And Jack Katz, by the way, happens to still be alive. He is 96 years young, and the man is from Brooklyn, New York originally. I don't know where he lives today, but I hope he's doing well, and I'm excited to check out his work finally after hearing a lot about it. So The First Kingdom by Jack Katz. That's something I will be covering on the show.
I need to get a copy of what you bought. I want to read this.
It's pretty wild. It looks incredible. Like the art style. Everybody listening to this, look up The First Kingdom, Jack Katz comic online. The art style is mind-blowing. It is extraordinarily detailed and very, very ahead of its time. It's wild-looking work. Beautifully drawn. Really beautifully drawn. Anyways, that's one of my books, Chris. What are you thinking? What's in the chamber for you for these solo episodes?
I'm going to read. It's a single issue. It's issue number 32 of Marvel Premiere. It has a character. This is done by Howard Chaykin. It's a character named Monarch Star Stalker, and it's a book that I heard about for a long time. I can never get my hands on it until eBay, and I got on eBay about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I read it, I loved it, I was fascinated by it. I always kind of love that mid to late 70s sci-fi that people were doing. I think people were like really, really influenced by like psychedelics in a way that they weren't later. You know, and
true.
And so, not that I think that I know that, and it's and so it kind of like bleeds into the work of these comic artists like that. And this is one of those books it's early Howard Chaykin. You know, predates American Flag. I mean, he's working for Marvel. It's like 78 or 77 or something like that. I can't remember when, but that's the book that I feel I might cover in our special one-shots that you will be able to get if you subscribe to this Patreon for $2 a month. Please, fans, we would enjoy it and love it and appreciate you very much. And now we will get back to Comics Rot Your Brain.
As much as I loved the bizarre ambition of it, like, it is so fucking dense. And I'm someone who loves dense comics. Like, I am a fan of 80s comics largely because of their sheer density. But AZTEC ACE really pushes that to a whole nother level. And we're going to put some images in our show notes for sure that will illustrate exactly what we're talking about. Because there are some pages from this series that are just mind-blowingly filled with word balloons and text, and to the point where the art is just wildly crowded out on some pages. And it's insane. Like, I've rarely seen a book that is this text-heavy. And honestly, like, the issues that we read that are normal-sized issues 2 and 3, each issue still took, like, at least an hour to read.
Yeah.
Like,
for sure.
This is unreal, the amount of focus and attention you need. And honestly, as a kid, when you had all the time in the world, these were the kind of comics, and particularly, you know, in the pre-internet era, these were the kind of comics I kind of fucking loved and adored as a kid, because you could take like 3 issues of AZTEC ACE with you, and it would probably last you the whole road trip wherever you were going if you're in the back of your parents' car, because like you could pour over this thing, and there's so much to find and all the nooks and crannies and the artwork. We haven't spoken that much about the artwork yet, but I do have to give it up to the artists, because Michael Hernandez, who did the first couple issues, and he then later in his career adopted the pen name Michael Bair, where he went on to have an incredibly distinguished career in mainstream comics at Marvel and DC, most famously perhaps working on JSA as an artist on that with David Goyer and Jeff Johns, and also inked Rags Morales on Identity Crisis, the big DC miniseries. So Michael Hernandez, from these first 2 issues, went on to become Michael Bair and did a whole bunch of mainstream comics for decades. But he's quite impressive on the first 2 issues, although I would say he's not necessarily as fully formed, in my opinion, as an artist as the artist who takes over with issue number 3. And issue number 3 switches to Dan Day. And it's the same inker, Nestor Redondo, inking all of it. But I got to say, issue 3 for me is a significant leveling up of the artwork. And I found issue 3 to be kind of jaw-droppingly impressive artistically. Like issue 3 for me, like you mentioned J.H. Williams the third earlier, Chris, and Promethea. Issue 3 for me feels very reminiscent of J.H. Williams as I'm looking through this. And I should say J.H. Williams is very reminiscent of Dan Day, because there's not a lot of artists who I would even think to compare as being like influences on J.H. Williams, because I think of his work as being so singular and so unique. But there are some spreads here in issue 3. Like I'm thinking of this one in particular where I don't know if this is a double page spread or not. It's hard to tell on the iPad, but it's where you've got the Sphinx and the pyramids in the background, and you've got all these huge vertical panels with the characters walking in. Yeah, it's a double page spread. They're walking in. Yeah, they're walking in front of the pyramids and the Sphinx. This looks like the kind of shit that J.H. Williams would do on a comic, and it would be beautiful and impressive. And this is Dan Day doing it, and it is gorgeous. And this work that Dan Day is doing on issue 3 for me was honestly breathtaking. Like the amount of skill, but also just sheer labor going into this book, and what Day is doing.
Labor is like, the operative word for this.
Oh my Lord, man. This looks so labor intensive. Like, Chris, look at this. Like, what is this like Statue of David looking image here that's like on the side of the page? Like what the fuck? Like issue 3 is like jaw dropping artistically. I was blown away.
Here's the thing. The thing about Michael, the difference between Michael Hernandez and Dan Day is Michael Hernandez is a good illustrator, but I don't think he fully has the grasp of how to do sequential arts the way that we're used to for comic art. And I say that not look, his illustrative skills are top notch. His figure drawing, his perspective, like when he's doing equipment, like all this stuff is really, really good. The thing is, his panel layouts, particularly for the type of story that's being told here, there's a lot of times that I got kind of lost on the page. I gotta follow what I got. Like, where am I going? And
he had a couple pages where he numbered the panels. I think even because of that. Like, remember that?
Yeah. And I was like, dude, that's
you shouldn't have to do that.
No, and that's probably like an editorial note after the fact. Like, hey, dude, you need to people. Because how do we follow this? The thing is that you're right. It totally. There's just like there's stuff that happens in 2 and 3 that just 1 and 2 that there's so much story. Like I feel like if like issue 1 technically today or even back then could have been a 4-issue miniseries, right?
You're totally right. Yeah.
It totally could have been, but I realized that if they did it as a 4-issue miniseries and he told it more kind of like more linear, the book probably wouldn't have sold. Probably the 4 issues have been done, not just miniseries, but maybe just 4-issue arc, and then it'd been done. And the book might not have. But who knows who bought it when it came out? Look, the thing it ran somewhere in the 30 issues, right? 20 some, like the high 20s,
like that.
Yeah. So people were buying it. But I feel, but when you get issue 3, like Dan Day's work is it's sad to me because his work reminds me of his brother Gene Day, the old guy who died, and not the old, but the art, one of the
he was actually quite young when he died, sadly.
He's young when he died, but he's mainly known for doing the Doug Moench work on Masters of Kung Fu. He must have like a 3-year or 4-year run, which is like the seminal run of that book. And it's so good. And if you look at Dan's work, it's like, it's very, very similar, and like just like the aesthetic is different.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, but I almost feel like Dan probably being younger, maybe I don't know, but he's in the same vicinity as his brother. He understands sequential art, like just on 2-3 levels higher than Hernandez. And it makes the reading of the book a lot more interesting because there is that one, there's that double page spread where he's like healing, and it's like, and it's it's like 2 page, and it's just weird. It reminds me of like J.S. Williams, like you said, J.S. Williams stuff.
Yeah. It's this one, I think, right here.
Yeah. It's so much like him, but it's so much more. you can follow the flow of the
Yes.
story like
Oh
way
yeah.
better, and also I think also whoever is like the way they did, I'm not sure how much uh um I'm not sure how much input the penciler has on how things are colored, but
Right.
the way that that third issue was colored, it helps
Yeah.
you kind of like the paneling
Yeah.
helps you
Yes.
understand what to follow more,
Yes.
particularly on that page and through all of it. So it's helpful with like the storytelling in a way that in the first that the coloring, which is not bad at all in the first two, but it's not. It's just coloring. It's not like servicing the storytelling. It's
Yes.
servicing the art, not the storytelling. And I think that's kind of like it's an interesting kind of difference when you have the different penciler. He's demanding more. He's maybe saying we need to do this, we need to do this, so that people
Yeah.
understand what's happening. You know.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating because you're right, Chris. The coloring also feels significantly leveled up with issue three, where like there's nothing wrong with the coloring in the first two issues of Aztec Ace, but they do have a much more washed out looking palette. And
Yes.
suddenly with issue three, like suddenly the colors sort of match the psychedelic tenor of much of the story, and they're way more vivid. And like suddenly the book is just like popping off the page, and with this incredible work from Dan Day that's just exquisite. Like the colorists are absolutely stepping up, and it's McFarlane and DeWalt doing the coloring here. But like even the splash page, Chris, like just the splash page itself, like signaling the arrival of Dan Day, is just fucking
Amazing.
gorgeous.
I
Like
mean,
an
yeah, but I mean,
amazing splash. Like just
it's two colors, and it's like that
yeah.
sacrificial thing of the Aztec thing. I mean, it's really
Oh
cool. It's really. I mean, the thing. I mean, the thing. It's interesting. You said that it's. You said it twice today. You said it's psychedelic, right? And I
yes.
and I feel like the way the book is colored let's take issue two for example, right? So there's that part in issue two where Ace is following Franklin Kwan, and they're on that boat, that's during the American Revolution, and it's kind of like, and that feels like a classic illustrated comic at that point,
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
feel like the rest of the book should have been colored differently, than that, because what's happening in third issue is the coloring is kind of is helping us ground where we are in the various in the real in the time stream. Because the
Yeah.
part when because when he's inside the gold meld or whatever it's called, the time machine, it's way more psychedelic. But when he's there, with the woman, and he's there in Egypt, and it's at night, like it's more subdued, but it feels like a night, and the
Yeah.
colors are like rich, but not too like it's not all over the place. And uses is I don't know, it's so smartly executed in the third issue that
It's
the story began to make sense to me by the time I got to
yeah.
third. I was like, oh, I see what's happening. I really see
Yeah.
what's happening, and I get it. And it's like I think that we as comic readers and comic lovers totally don't give colorists enough talk in terms of how they help the storytelling. Like, I mean, I'll tell you how this is today, because I was watching part of Cartoonist Kayfabe today, where they had Jeff Darrow on talking about
Mm,
Akira, and they were
sure.
going through
Sure.
the black and white version of Akira, which is, that's how it was originally done. But when I first read it, when it came to America, it was an epic book, and it was colored, and I feel like I was like, what, as much as I like Akira, I love it colored more than I like the black and white, because
Mm,
the color helps a lot of the storytelling, if you know what you're doing. And those guys on that book did. I think people think it's sacrilege because they colored like a manga, but I think that it really helped with the storytelling of that. Because there's moments in there, like they showed a panel when he's like, when Kaneda is like zipping on one of those hover bikes, in the
yeah.
background is all speed lined out, But the thing is, it's speed lined out, and I'm like, oh, but when you add color to the speed lines, when he's zipping by, then you know what it looks like? It looks like he's blurred. Like the background around
Mm,
him is blurred because he's moving too fast to really grasp what's happening. But it's just black and white. It's just like speed lines. So there's a difference you can get if you know how to use color and think about how I was using it the right way. And that's what this guy does. It's the same guy. It's the same two guys, DeWalt
Well,
and McFarlane. And they just had.
was it
I
the
know
two guys, the
David
same
was
two
like, "Hey,
guys?
do that."
Really? Oh shit! Interesting.
I'm pretty sure it is. You know.
Issue two. Yeah, you're right. McFarlane and DeWalt also colored issue two.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is so interesting because issue two, the colors don't look anywhere near like as vivid in a certain way. Like it's a different palette, and
Totally.
they're
Totally.
not bad, but they're not nearly as attractive or vibrant or kind of almost like pop art psychedelic as issue three. Issue
Yeah.
three goes somewhere very different. So you're right, man. I wonder how much Dan Day had to like have some kind of input on, no, this is the way I want this to be colored. Let's go for this kind of saturation. Let's go for this kind of palette, because I don't know what else to use to explain the difference, because it's the same colorists. Yeah, you're right. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um
mean,
look
I mean,
Looking at
yeah.
Day's work though, it's just like it actually makes me want to continue reading the series, because honestly, like the story itself has left me a little bit baffled, but Day's work is so good that I really do want to keep going with issues 4, 5, 6, and 7, just to see where he goes as an artist also. Cause like without exaggeration, man, like many pages, perhaps most of the pages in issue 3 are just showstoppers. Like it's kind of a
Yeah.
clinic in terms of masterful comic art. Like it's
Yeah.
really kind of
Really good.
wild how
Really
great
good.
this
You're
is.
right. You're right. Like clinic. Yeah, because it's funny because not that it's funny, but it's like it's interesting how in the '80s these guys who would be doing these indie works are
Yeah.
like, I mean, like he's an indie book. He should be. I mean, he should be on a Marvel book or a DC book,
Whew.
hands
Yeah.
down. And
Oh
he's not.
yeah.
I mean, because here's the thing:
Mhm.
I never heard of Dan Day until I read this. You
Yeah.
know, I knew of
Yeah.
his brother Gene, but then it's like,
Mhm.
well, I died, so there's not the body of work is limited. But it's like he should have been doing a Marvel book. I mean, there's no reason
Yeah.
why they didn't scoop him up. There's no reason, unless he was like, fuck Marvel because they worked my brother to death, so I don't want to work with them. You know, because there is that rumor that he worked too hard.
That
He kind of
that
worked
was the
himself to
rumor.
death
That was the
on,
rumor,
on
which to be fair, Jim Shooter denies that adamantly. So I don't know what the
well,
truth of it was.
he has to deny it. What's he gonna say? I slave labored him to death on my book. He's not gonna admit that. Probably a lawsuit. You know,
I
shit. Um,
speaking of lawsuits, that's Chris Derrick speaking there. I'm not I'm not impugning anyone. I have no idea what happened.
I'm not
But
imputing
it
anyone
was
either. No, look, it's me. Look. I'll over statement. But what I'm saying is the shooter can't admit, like shooter couldn't
yes.
say, "Oh yeah, I worked him to death." Ha ha ha.
Yes.
He can't do
Yeah.
that because there'll be a wrongful death lawsuit
Yeah.
in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
But but we don't know. But that was just the rumor. And the thing is, if you go
It
back
was,
and
yes.
if you look at that last year of Masters of Kung Fu, like I think issue 100 was like this or double size issue and shit like that. It was so amazing. Like Master of Kung Fu, despite what you think about the story and the fact that it's so like of its time of the late 70s, early 80s of the ways to depicting Asian people, stuff like that. Gene Day kicked fucking ass on
Yeah.
that. He
Yes.
really took it to another
Yeah.
level, and there was nobody at that time who was doing fights like he was doing. His layouts for how he would kind of like construct fights on the page were really fucking cool. And now you see his brother, like I said, like the aesthetic is very similar. It's like, it's almost like,
Yeah.
these guys are in the same household and they were copying each other and trying to outdo each other, trying to be as kids. That's why their art style is so similar. But you're right. Like I definitely wanted to read more. Plus the story began to make sense, and I don't know and I think about it now, did it make more sense because the art was more like
I
conducive to
I
how it was telling me the
suspect, yeah,
story?
I was thinking that. I was thinking that too, man. I suspect that that's actually a big part of it. I think that because Dan Day's work was so vibrant and clear with its storytelling, I think it did make the story more apprehendable. But also, just to go back to Master of Kung Fu, just for one quick second, I'm curious because you've brought that up a couple times, and I'm wondering, because that's a book I've always actually wanted to hunt up a bunch of the original issues, and I've got like maybe a dozen of them, but I've never read most of that run. I'm curious, what were your thoughts on Gene Day's work, which you clearly loved, as opposed to Paul Gulacy's also legendary run on Master of Kung Fu. How did you like Gene Day's work as compared to Gulacy's work, and like what did you feel about both of them on Master of Kung Fu?
So here's the thing: Galacy's work feels, and he's a great artist,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
he's like
I love Gulacy.
but his work feels like he is like and this is not a slight at all. He's like an acolyte of like Jim Steranko, right? Like it feels like that.
Yes, sure, sure.
Like there's a style to it that is just highly stylized. And I think that what I like about Gene Day's work is that it feels more illustrative and it feels more
Mm,
I don't want to say like more realistic, but it does feel more realistic because it's not so like that with head shapes and body shapes. I mean, like here's the thing: you can tell a fucking Paul Gulacy piece of art in like 2 seconds.
yeah,
What's that like what's that game show people used to watch in the 80s? Name that tune. They had to name that tune. Hey, I can
yeah,
fucking name that tune in like 5 seconds or 5 notes. I can hit it in 3 notes. I mean, like, you know
right.
what? This should be a comic book thing. Like, name that artist.
That would actually be really fun. You just see like a little piece of a panel. Who drew
Yeah,
that?
I can do it in 10 seconds. I can do it in
Yeah.
5 seconds. Paul Gulacy, you give me 1 second, I go, oh, that's Paul Gulacy, because his work
Yeah,
is so
totally.
because it's so unique, it's so specific,
Hmm.
and it's so
Yep.
like this is my visual voice, bam, and it's
Yeah.
just and it's a little more. I think the difference also between Gene Day's work and his work is that Gene Day's work for the fights and everything like that felt more fluid. Like he understood how to make the fighting seem more fluid. Not like there's like like when like in fights and comics, you're obviously taking a snapshot of the action. Like it's like
Sure.
it's like using a camera to get like whatever like in a thousandth of a second. But there's something about the way Gene Day's art where he would grab the body in a right kind of pose, or like it felt like if like you felt the energy in the panel of like of Shang-Chi's muscles and the strikes, and it all felt so vibrant in a way that wasn't quite the same with Gulacy. There's nothing to take away from Gulacy's run. His run's amazing. I mean, look, I think like Jim Starlin like started that book, and Starlin didn't have his
Yes.
style. His style wasn't
Yep.
quite there yet, and it was a market upgrade to go to Paul Gulacy. And I think he ran for maybe like 2 years, 3 years, something like that. I can't remember what it is. And then the final 2 or 3 years of that is Gene Day, but it's an upgrade, particularly for that type of story, for what that content was about. Like Gulacy's work is there's some really good like Gulacy work on like his spy thriller stuff is really fucking cool. And there is that spy thriller aspect to Master of Kung Fu, but it's slightly different than I think that Gene Day understood. I mean, it's possible he knew like martial arts. It feels like he knows martial arts. I think that's maybe what I really want to say. You know,
Hmm.
I could be wrong.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, I've just been trying to look up some stuff about Dan Day too while we're talking here, and Dan Day apparently did do, I think, more mainstream work than we realized, because apparently Dan Day has worked on a lot of Marvel books over the years. And he says his favorite books he worked on were Captain America and Batman, and he's also drawn covers for Spider-Man, Wolverine, the Incredible Hulk. So and he's been a penciler or inker on Doctor Strange, Swamp Thing, and a bunch of other stuff. But I, similar to you, I think was not that familiar with Dan Day's work. I think I'd kind of missed most of his runs, or maybe he did a lot of fill-in work here and there. I have no idea, but I was not overly familiar with his work at all myself either.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, look, if he's done Captain America, if he's done Batman, then he's did filler work because he didn't do work on Captain America that I can recall, and I read and I have a lot of Captain America comics from
Right.
like throughout the '80s. I have like a huge
Yeah.
chunk of those. I don't, but the thing is this, right? He didn't do no seminal run.
Hmm.
Like he wasn't paired with like Roger Stern or like fucking David McCreaney or anyone who was doing those great runs on those Marvel books. Because like I think like part of what makes an artist pop in the '80s, particularly is what was the storyline that you were doing? You
Yeah,
know,
sure.
like if you think about Todd McFarlane's work on the Hulk, right? Like he did. I don't remember who was doing the Hulk first. I'm gonna say maybe he's Luke McConnell. Totally. I'm just pulling out of my ass right now. But that Mister Fix It character, that with the
Oh,
Gray
right.
Hulk, and he
Right, right.
was
I
bopping
think there was
around.
a guy there was a guy back then named Jeff Purvis who was drawing
That's
the
it.
Gray
Maybe
Hulk
that's it.
for a while.
That's it. That's
Yeah,
it. That
yeah,
Jeff
he
Lewis.
drew it for a little bit.
So, but he's the one who I think was drawing it first when Peter David was doing it, and it was great Peter David storytelling. But the minute he jumps in and does that leader, does that Mister Fix It as the gray guy with McFarlane, it's such a cool storyline with that art that you're like, whoa, I need to read
Mhm.
this, because the thing is there's like if you're a great artist and you're not and you're on a bad storyline, no one's gonna read it or catch it because
Yes.
there I can't remember like there was a speaking of Captain America, there was a Captain America storyline where Cap had like quit, right? And there was this guy named this guy he eventually became like the US agent who they gave Captain America's shield to, and Cap was like in some black
Yep.
uniform,
I
everything
remember
like
that.
that, and Red Skull was behind like him getting kicked out, like some very clone of the Red Skull. It was a really really cool like actual good storyline of Captain America. Right? Didn't have a great artist on it, so people don't really
Mhm.
remember. You
Right.
know, they don't. If you think about the Walt Simonson thing with like Beta Ray Bill and Thor and all that and that whole thing, right? That's different if Walt Simonson's not drawing it. But that story's a good story, you
Yeah.
know. But it's but it was
Oh,
written by Walt
you're right.
Simonson, but the melding of those two becomes something ultimately different.
You're
I mean,
100% right. Totally. Yeah, it's totally true. And like if a different artist, I don't want to like name any names, but if a lesser artist had drawn that initial Beta Ray Bill story, the character may not have clicked for people. The
right,
exact same
right,
story, just that character may have
absolutely,
come and gone. There's a lot of characters that come and go when the artists don't really design them or draw them in a way that feels inspired, obviously. And
yeah.
Beta Ray Bill was drawn by Walt Simonson, created by Walt Simonson, and becomes a beloved figure. And there are some really amazing artists that just never have done long runs on books where they are, properly celebrated the way they should be. Like there's a guy like, somebody like Kevin Nolan. Like Kevin Nolan, I think is a brilliant artist. Like, he's an
Yeah.
artist's artist, like an amazing, amazing illustrator, an amazing inker, amazing penciler, just a phenomenal artist. But Kevin Nolan hasn't had any like major long runs on books. And really like the thing I could point to that might be one of the more significant things he's done was he did a bunch of short stories with Alan Moore in America's Best Comics about a character named Jack B. Quick that was like a
Yeah.
little genius kid who would invent like scientific and wacky inventions that would cause crazy problems in his small town. And they're like really perfectly charming, brilliant Alan Moore short stories, beautifully drawn by Kevin Nolan. But the guy is such a like world class comic book artist, one of the best of his generation, but yet he's never done this. He hasn't done like a Batman Year One. He hasn't done
Right.
something where you're like, oh,
Right.
that's a mic drop. There's no mic drop. It's just more like, damn, I appreciate that man's skill and craft and the just gorgeous artwork he does. But there hasn't been that one run or that one masterpiece that blows people away that you kind of wish that there was, because his art is so gorgeous that he deserves to have like an evergreen book like that out there.
Well, I mean, look, a classic example of someone we talked about in this podcast before is fucking Trevor Von Eden.
Yeah, yeah,
Never had,
sure. I mean,
never had, look. When we read that thing and it was said he was the Miller's original idea to do Batman Year One, that
yeah,
changed. I'm gonna tell you right now, if he does that book, that changes comic history
yep, changes
in a
everything.
lot of but
Yeah,
again, it's one of those things like if Mazzucchelli is doing a Batman Year One, it's not written by Frank Miller. It's okay. If it's written by Frank Miller and it's a lesser artist than Mazzucchelli or Van Eden, it's still a Frank Miller story and it's
yeah,
good. but it's like the melding of the two. And a lot of times people kind of overlook how important the writer is to give the artist the freedom to create something that we all kind of like believe in, and
Yeah.
just go, ooh. And I feel like back to this book, it's like Dan Day, he elevated this book. And I'm sure that Doug Moench, I bet you could, I don't know, we ask him, figure out, send him an email. It's like, hey, so what changed in you when you were writing this book? Now that you had Dan Day on the book,
Yeah.
because
Yeah. Right.
I'm
Because
sure,
totally.
'cause
Man, for sure. Because it's like getting fucking J.H. Williams III all of a sudden to take over a comic you're writing. It like that kind of an artist who can bring that level of like insane sort of like wild skill to something. Yeah, it has to make you switch up your game as a writer.
well, I think we were talking recently about how like when Brian Hitch and Warren Ellis started working on The Authority and on the other book that whatever what's the other book he did. But was it The Authority? The first thing he did, yeah, The Authority, right?
Authority,
I
yeah.
mean, yeah, I mean, there's that like deconstructed storytelling that you were talking about. That
Yeah, like
oh, I mean,
the
look,
decompressed kind of big
yeah,
widescreen kind of style that they pioneered.
yeah, because like he's working with, like I told you at that time, he was working with Ken Lashley on that Excalibur, and that's all
Hmm.
really really good and beautiful work. But then he changes the book with this other artist, and it's like, oh, I can do something different now. I can kind of like tailor my storytelling to what the artist can do, and that's the thing that Warren Ellis used to. I'm not to really mention that much, but he used to talk about that a lot in some of his stuff. As like he would like, there's an artist I want to find because what they do like does this for you, and not too many other like writers are talking and giving like interviews about stuff, talking about their work that much. I mean, like what's his name does now a little bit. Ed Brubaker with his thing from the desk of Ed Brubaker, but he kind of exclusively works with Sean Phillips. So it's kind of like he's not saying, "Hey, I'm gonna do this book with so and so, and his style is this, so I'm gonna try this type of storytelling because I have this guy." And I mean, that's where I think
Yeah.
I mean, that's where I think where Mensch is like, oh, this guy can give me this type of storytelling ability on the page. I can tell my
Yeah.
stories like this. Because again, you mentioned that page, that little thing that with the Sphinx on the the double picture with the Sphinx.
Right.
So like the way that's designed, he's thinking, how do I do this? He probably wrote it in a way and said, "Hey, they're in front of the Sphinx. Draw this, blah blah blah. Here's the dialogues being said." And dude came back with these initial sketches. Probably blew his fucking mind. He was like,
Yeah, they're
"God,
staggering. They're
yeah,
staggering. And fucking Day does something really unique also I should mention in issue 3 is he's using a ton of long vertical panels, like page length vertical panels. He does that on page after page after page, and that's a really difficult thing for an artist to pull off in terms of the composition of a comics page. And you frankly don't see hardly any comic artists even doing that for the most part because I think it's very difficult to get these giant full length panels vertically to tell a story because if you think about it you're limiting the actual space the compositional space so extremely to this vertical kind
it's
of
very
a
narrow,
frame.
very very
Yeah,
narrow."
it's
Yeah,
very
yeah,
narrow, right? So like what are you going to put in there? But somehow Day figures out a way to not only make that work but he makes it sing. Like again, we're going to put some of this in the show notes so people can see it, but it's extraordinary what he's able to do with these page length vertical panels on page after page after
yeah,
page. And like he's really like casting a spell visually that you don't see often on a comic page. He's treating it like a canvas in a way that's just inspiring. And like I think a lot of the artists that we get excited about from this era that we're talking about on the show, like your Trevor Von Edens, they do treat that comic book page like a canvas where they can experiment and do new things, and they're not just like locked into a rigid formula. And so I wonder if J.H. Williams III was reading Aztec Ace and looking at Dan Day's work. I suspect maybe. Like, I definitely feel like it's one of the very few people that I could point to from the 80s where I would say, like, oh, yeah, I can see a direct line from this to J.H. Williams on Promethea.
yeah.
Like, there's like
Oh,
not a lot of people.
oh,
Like,
sure.
maybe like you could maybe say Steranko going back to the 60s evolved into like kind of like Galassi, and that evolves into sort of maybe what Day's doing with some of his compositional stuff. And then I could see a line and a thread going all the way to J.H. Williams back to Steranko. But there's not a lot of dudes in the 80s, not a lot of artists in the 80s doing this kind of like crazy ambitious illustrative artwork that looks so insanely time intensive, and particularly on a regular book like this. Like, it's just mind blowing when you consider the amount of hours he must have been putting in.
That to me is, I mean, I wonder what the publishing schedule was on this. Like, was this a monthly book?
I think it
Was it a
was
bi-monthly book?
bi-monthly. I'm not sure if I'm right, but that's like my memory is. We can probably check the letters page to see, but I
Yeah,
feel like I want to say it was bi-monthly.
it's crazy because I mean, you know, it's interesting you point that out. You point out like how hard it is to do those vertical panels. I just remember there's like a vertical panel at the end of like the Rocketeer book when
Mm,
like, he stumbles upon the Betty Page character. She's getting like photographed, and it's kind of like an homage to some of her like risque actual artwork. But I remember the page is it's a
right.
narrow panel, and then there's like two panels to the side and stuff like that. And it's interesting you say that it's like, oh, it is harder for the comic artist to do that because he's used to being able to like, you know, do it wider and
Yeah.
design wider because
Yeah.
pages and canvases and everything is usually a wider thing. I mean, it's almost kind of like, you know, nowadays when people like shoot stuff on the cell phone. This is a classic example, but when people shoot on the cell phone and they capture like live video and they're shooting it in portrait mode, it's like it's very hard for them to capture everything the right way because we're not used to seeing stuff that's thin like that. And it's like, hey,
Right.
just turn it on its side and we can get what you're showing us better because you have to really know how to design an image that's that
Yes.
narrow. And most people have no idea how to do that because nothing we do in life
Yeah.
is usually that kind of a narrow kind of like field of view, you know? But
Exactly.
again,
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy.
but that's where this
Yeah.
guy, like, that's where he excels. He excels in so
Hmm.
many ways and so many pages. I mean, he does some weird shit. I mean, there's that part when like he's fighting that crocodile in the Nile when they're back in
Yeah.
like the past and like the eye unzips and it's like there's these miniature. I was like, dude, you're out of see again. This is back to Doug Munch. Like, you're out of control. You are like I'm serious. What drugs are you smoking and
Yeah.
inhaling
Yeah.
and shooting
It's
to come up
true.
with? Because it's kind of like here's some
Yes.
Gulliver Travels, kind of like shifting Lilliputians, and it's just like does this even have a place like in this story this storytelling canvas? But he's like, yeah, it does because I'm doing it. I'm gonna just do
Yeah.
whatever I want. You know, he's crazy. He's crazy. He's
Right.
I mean
He
like
really, it's nuts. It's really out there. And we talked a little bit after we had just read the first issue last week about how if you did not know better, you would think that Doug Moench was like some wild fucking psychedelic novelist from the 60s who was writing his first ever comic book with Aztec Ace. Because, like, surely no experienced comic writer would be trying to cram as much verbiage and as much text onto every single page as Moench is doing here. But like the hilarious thing about this is like, oh no, Doug Moench was one of the biggest writers in mainstream comics at the time. And his mainstream work did not read like this. It did not have this level of insanity nor density to it. Not at this level. It was not this
no, no,
out
no.
there. I mean, I read Doug Moench's Batman growing up as a kid for a long time, and I'm not as
Yeah,
familiar with the Master of Kung Fu. So maybe Master of Kung Fu was more dense. It probably was in the 70s. But like, I mean, I just know Doug Moench from Batman, a lot of that in the 80s, and it was much more in the vein of traditional comics. And to think at the same time, relatively speaking, he was turning out these AZTEC ACE scripts, like, is kind of wild to me because he knew how to write a traditional comic at a more traditional kind of pace and whatnot, but he was choosing to make this just unwieldy as hell. And like, it's a wild choice.
well, it's interesting because like this week, I finally got around to start to read the Sixum Sirius, right? Or Sixum Cyrus. Well,
Oh, speaking of Doug Mensch and Paul Galassi, oh damn, okay.
yeah, and it's interesting because it's a it's this it's not nearly as dense text as this, but it is denser text than it. And he does all these, and he loves to do like
Mm.
word games with people, the way people talk. You know, like he does it in this, like
Mm.
the head, this like Sigmund Freud head has a very weird way of talking. Like sometimes he'll speak with like that weird German accent in English in a way. And I mean, and so he's kind of an interesting, kind of like a wordsmith. And I feel like he knew, like, if I'm gonna write for Batman or Spider-Man or whatever it is, I
Or
gotta
like
write
fucking Moon Knight. He did a Moon Knight. He
Moon
did the
Knight.
Moon
Yeah,
Knight run with
yeah,
Sienkiewicz.
if I'm gonna do that, which is around the same time as this, you know,
Yes, that's what's crazy.
yeah.
Yeah.
So he's saying I gotta write a certain way to make money, but if I'm gonna do something that's kind of for me and for cool and that I think is cool, or just whatever it is, something that's for me, I'm gonna do it the way I want to do it. And that's why I like the Six from Cyrus and this. It's like there's a way more density in storytelling because he wanted to be, because he might have felt constrained in having to write so scantily in these other
Yeah.
books, you know. But again, like you were saying at the top of the podcast, there's this episode. There's not a lot of, there's a freedom to way he's telling the story that no other medium could really contain,
Yes.
you know. And I
100%.
think that, and
100%.
I'm sure he realized that, and it was like, how do I get to just exercise like a storytelling muscle that I don't get to do, that I can't do in a movie, I can't do in television, I can't do in a novel, I can't do in like mainstream comics. Oh, there's independent comics. Oh, I'm gonna do. You know what? I can do one and do it
Yeah.
this way, in a certain way that is very specific to what this market could take. Because just to you mentioned the stuff that was in the letter column. I want to talk about that for a second. You know, like I read the letter column. It's only in issue 3 is when it begins, but the letter column is actually, these motherfuckers love this book
Oh,
in
I
the letter
know.
column,
Yes.
which which I found, which I didn't find shocking. I didn't find shocking, but I was like, but there was a couple people were like, just like we're saying, couple guys were like, we didn't understand half of this, but we loved it anyway. And I'm like,
Right.
well,
Right.
yeah, guess what? 40 years later, I don't understand a lot of it either, but I still like it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really interesting. I think the letter
Totally.
comes. I mean, you wonder if he's like cherry picking to make sure that he's like, and he's sure, but maybe he is, maybe he isn't, because he made some statement in there where he's like that there wasn't even like an address for like the letter column, right? So the people who wrote into the letter column and got their letters printed were people who were like serious Eclipse comic fans and were like, okay, wait. I'm gonna read this book, and I like it so much that I'm gonna look through all the book to see where the editorial offices is, and that's where I'm going to send my letter. It's like someone who's really impassioned about what they read, which I think is
Wow.
true. It's like, I mean, like, despite what we're saying about like how complicated this book is, I think if you just were reading it and had like more time in the day and wasn't being
Yes.
inundated with there's so much distraction that's in our modern day lifestyle, this book might feel like you said, it's a more immersive type of storytelling, and you would be able, because he mentions it's a lot like American Flag. A couple people say it's a lot like American Flag,
Yeah.
and that's a book that I don't remember reading. So we should, I mean, maybe
I,
we'll
I'm
read
yeah,
that.
I'm very familiar with American Flag because it's one of my favorite comics of all time, and I get the comparison because Flag also has like a real density to it, but American Flag I feel like was much more of a direct influence on Frank Miller's Dark Knight, and American Flag has a density to it with like in terms of like the little TV screen heads all across the storytelling. And I think that's kind of where Frank Miller got that device for Dark Knight, which came out like shortly after that initial Flag run. But like Chaykin's got a density to it, but it's also much more like popcorn, mainstream sort of friendly storytelling, even though it's this kind of wild dystopian world, etc. But it's still very much squarely apprehendable storytelling. It's far from psychedelic. The maybe some of the wackiest things about American Flag is that Ruben Flag's got a cat named Raoul. The main character has a cat named Raoul who has like cybernetic limbs and talks, and that's dope. Like Raoul the cat's one of my favorite characters in that book, but it's not like, oh my god, what the fuck is going on? I don't understand. It's just like, oh cool, there's a cat with like fucking metal hands that talks. Like you get it right away, and everyone treats the cat totally normal, like it's no big thing, you know. But like it's not out there the way that this book is out there. So I can understand the comparison on some kind of a formalistic level at the time because there's like a comparable density. But what Chaikin was doing was so much more easily apprehendable. And I think it was reflected in the way the two books were received, in the sense that like American Flag was on so many like kind of awards lists and was a book that was like celebrated to a greater extent. I think it penetrated like the consciousness or the conscience of fandom in a deeper way because it was more apprehendable. I keep saying that, but I think that's the word I'm thinking. Now, it's not to say that AZTEC Ace doesn't have all these amazing qualities. Like you say, AZTEC Ace does remind me of a lot of books that I really, really adore, like The Invisibles. And certainly it reminds me in a way of Grant Morrison. And I would not be surprised actually if Grant Morrison had read this and found it to be influential, because it's in the same vein as I think a lot of the stuff that The Invisibles was inspired by, whether it's Luther Arkwright or Doctor Who or the Jerry Cornelius stories by Michael Moorcock. Like, it's a lot of like transdimensional time travel, wild, just batshit crazy imaginative storytelling. And I think there's a lot to recommend it. Like you were saying, I find the book Aztec Ace mystifying, but yet I do want to read more. And for anybody who has a ton of time on their hands and really wants to dive into something that's going to be challenging, like it's a hell of a fascinating book, and I can see why it's fondly remembered. And the Kickstarter, which we mentioned, that was done recently to publish the collected first 15 issues of Aztec Ace, was quite successful. They raised over $35,000 after wanting, just they had a goal of 20,000, and a lot of people contributed to the collected hardcover here. You've got Aztec Ace sketches in this collected volume by Bill Sienkiewicz, Jeff Lemire, Paul Pope, Michael Avon Oming, Matt Kint, Mike Kaluta, ton of people, a ton of really, awesome
Bill
people contributing to
Sienkiewicz,
this.
like Bill
Yeah, Bill
Sienkiewicz has
Sienkiewicz.
done some art.
Yeah,
So,
Sienkiewicz. I mean, it's
I mean,
amazing.
so these are all people. I mean, someone like Bill Sienkiewicz, obviously Paul Pope. I mean, interesting Paul Pope because like these people are only doing the art because they probably fondly remember the book,
Exactly.
and I think,
Yeah.
and yeah, and it's a wide range of artists with a wide range of styles, with a wide range of like storytelling proclivities, and I feel like again I actually want to read issues 4 and 5 just to get a sense of where this book was going, because
Yes.
it's such a because it's like, for us to say it's challenging, that's not a negative. It's just like you really got to focus on the book. Like I think that like earlier this year, people were talking about Dune the movie, right? And
Yeah.
some people were saying like I was on Twitter and I was reading some stuff about it, and people were talking about like art film and the way that people are looking at films right now in film school, and some people were complaining. These younger people were complaining, who were just coming out of film school, that Dune was an incomprehensible art film.
Oh my God.
And I was
Wow.
like, what are people talking about? But then I
Mm.
realized it's not so disposable and so escapist. And you just sit down there and watch it, I mean, you actually have to concentrate. To me, like something's challenging means you got to concentrate when you are engaging with it. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, it's just like completely disposable, and you don't need it. I mean, you obviously don't need it in your life it's just like, what's the point? Like these days, so I think this is a book that's like it's worth reviewing and revisiting and looking at, because I read it, the first issue, I read it and I just was like this is something that I do with a lot of comics though, is, and a lot of things, is like the level of mystery of what was happening kept drawing me in. Like I was like, you know
Right.
what? I need to know what, like, this is a puzzle. I need to like to undo the puzzle pieces and put it together, and like and that kept me, and then it is but then it kept expanding. Like the puzzle kept expanding. I was like, oh, you know what? Here's this final puzzle piece. Haha! No, here's a double page spread that's gonna like that's gonna blow your mind. And this is like a few
Yeah.
times in that first issue, and it kept. But it was like I feel like if I was reading this monthly, because I read
Yeah.
these 3 issues in like maybe like a week, and if I was reading it monthly, I'd probably savor it so much more and
Right.
probably read it a couple times in a month before the next issue
Yeah.
came out because it's like you worry about what's being said, what's being lost, what's not happening. Um, in a way that now, like you almost like never read a book more than once now,
Yeah.
because it's so they're so slight in the story that they're trying to tell,
Yeah.
and just like and just the way maybe see people's attention spans or whatever it is, or maybe it's like that deconstructive storytelling people have done, like like that was kind of got the vogue in the 90s, that that the plot lines are always slight and like the moments are really big, and I feel like this guy has big moments and big plot, and that's like
Yeah.
so kind of like it's an anachronism to what we're used to now, but it's
Yeah.
I mean, like it's like there's part like look there's the like I'm not like the part when he fights like when Nine Crocs like fights those men in front of him, and he's like, is he doing this to tell me how good he is? And then he goes and beats the same. He can't beat more than 6 guys, and he goes and beats 10 guys. He's like, I can
Yeah.
show you how. All right, it's
Yeah.
like that's a cool little storytelling moment that tells you about their rivalry without the kind of like typical kind of like like the little Bond villain, like I'm gonna tell you how what's gonna happen to you,
Right.
blah blah blah. He doesn't
Right.
do that. He just shows you this is how dangerous I am. I'm gonna do something that you don't think I can do, that no one thinks I can do. And it's just a physical act. And then it's like, oh, you think you're that good? I'm gonna do it better than you. And it's like a great and he gets pissed and like tries to have and he has his goon try to shoot him. And it's like it's like there's great moments in this, really great moments in this that are like kind of like they're showstoppers in a way, but it's almost
Yeah.
like he has too many showstoppers in each issue. And I think the storytelling also slows down in issue 3. Maybe do you?
Yeah. Yes. I think that's true. And I mean, I'm just looking at this Kickstarter. They have images of various double page spreads and splash pages kind of from throughout the run of the series. And man, like there's just a ton of breathtaking images from throughout the run of Aztec Ace. And it looks like it's not only Dan Day, but Tom Yeats came on board as an artist later in the run. And yeah, man, it's a visually overwhelmingly just impressive book. And I think something else we should mention that I don't think we did mention maybe earlier, or if we did, I missed it, is that the book is edited by Cat Ironwood. And of course, it was published at Eclipse Comics, where Cat Ironwood basically was running the company along with her husband, Dean Mullaney. And Eclipse is one of the great comics publishers of the 80s, and Cat Ironwood was a legend, a legendary figure in her own right. And at the same time she was editing this book, she was also editing Alan Moore's Miracle Man, and editing a whole bunch of the Eclipse line, if not all of the Eclipse line. And so just to give credit where it's due, Eclipse stood behind their creators, and they gave 100% creator ownership to their creators who were putting out books for them at that time, which was something that not a lot of comic publishers then or now do. And I think
Right.
it's something that Eclipse Comics should be celebrated for. That they're one of the really one of the good guys, I would say, in comics history, because they publish some amazing work, and the fact that a lot of it is still in print or able to come back into print is largely a function of the fact that they allowed the rights to stay with the creators and
Yeah.
not get like lost in like some terrible legal limbo.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah.
Because this Kickstarter thing wouldn't be able to happen.
Right,
I mean,
exactly. Yeah. I mean, thank God. Thank God. And it looks like for the Kickstarter, by the way, Kat Ironwood was very much involved. She wrote a new foreword to the book. And as well, it looks like there was also a new introduction by Doug Moench himself. And this is kind of interesting. There was a new essay in this Kickstarter hardcover of Aztec Ace about logo design and comic book coloring in the 1980s by Dennis McFarlane, one of the colorists on this, which actually sounds fascinating to me
oh, it's
because
fascinating.
I'm an 80s comic geek. I want to read about logo design and comic coloring in the 80s. I want to
But
read
that's the
that.
thing too. But the thing that is interesting is because Michael Hernandez did not well, the thing is that Dennis McFarlane, he created the logo. He designed the aesthetic. So it's
It's a
interesting
great
that
logo. It's a really good logo.
the colorist did the logo art, which to me is
Yeah.
not like it's not like an impossibility at all.
Sure.
It's not the word, but it's very rare for the
Yes.
colorist to be doing that kind of
Yeah.
work. But I feel like like he's like I mean because his coloring styles are so varying. He's
Yeah.
like a super talented dude with a lot of like abilities that weren't
Yeah.
really weren't really like being like maximized. And so like, hey, do you want to do this fucking logo? He was like, for sure. Um,
Yeah.
no,
It's a
I mean,
super dope. It's a terrific logo, and I'm just noticing looking at the covers of the first 15 issues here that they have all laid out in a row for this Kickstarter on one page, and they change up the color scheme on every single issue. Like the logo is a different color on every one of the first 15 issues, different like multiple colors. So
wow.
like to
But
me
that's
that's
him
the mark.
coloring it probably. There's
Yeah,
somebody.
yeah. He's coloring his own logo. And I feel like that's the mark of an amazing logo when you can switch out the color scheme like every single time and the logo still pops.
Yeah, yeah. It's a fantastic design.
Yeah.
Fantastic design. I mean, yeah. It's weird. It's weird that yeah. I'm so want to get this book. It's on Amazon for $79. Comes out on August 22nd.
Oh shit.
Which means that there's like enough. If it's on Amazon, that means they must have like I don't know how that works
Hmm.
with a Kickstarter that would be available as a pre-order on Amazon, but it
I think
is. So
yeah. Well, the Kickstarter was a while ago. So there maybe there was like a release window where the Kickstarter peeps were able to get it first. But then yeah, because the Kickstarter says it was being delivered in January 2019.
huh.
So at this point, so it's been a few years, so it must be that like yeah, the Kickstarter people all they got their copy of this, I imagine, and now they're putting it out for the rest of the world, I guess.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, oh, I have that one. I ordered like I ordered a book. I ordered like a getting off topic for a second, but I ordered like a Rick Remender. I think I ordered his Seventh of Eternity book or something like that on a
Oh,
pre-starter.
that was the thing he did with Opena, with Jerome Opena.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's coming out. I think it comes out next month. I ordered it like a while ago, like the hardback because I got the
Oh wow.
hardbacks for low, like the oversized things for that and for low, which I think is one of my favorite things he's done. But yeah, I'm curious to maybe if this is that size, if this is like a large, the large format kind of reproduction.
Hmm.
But
It looks
you
like
know,
huh.
what
I'm
does it
just
look
looking
like?
at the cover. I'm looking at the cover of this. I think this might be the more recent edition. Yeah, the more recent edition has a different cover than the Kickstarter. Like I think it's the same collection, but it's actually like a different cover.
Yeah, yeah,
So, huh.
yeah. And that's a weird cover. That's a
It's a
really
very weird
weird.
cover, and it's actually got a word balloon on the cover. I think it's a panel from one of the issues with. It's got one of the characters. What's that? Who is that in the in the gas mask there? You see that character? Is that? Do you
Oh,
recognize?
that's fucking Nine Crocs.
That's
That's
Nine
Nine.
Croc. Okay, yeah, I was thinking that was okay. That's Nine Croc, and the in that panel he's saying he is beyond time itself. That's on the cover. That's kind of cute.
Because
Um,
that's the story, man. I mean,
yeah, that's it.
but you know, it's interesting. You bring up Cat Ironwood because I want to bring up because there's a woman who's I this there's like there's some weird sexual tension in this book
Hmm.
that I was like, who let this slide? Like, there's that moment in issue.
80s comics, man.
Yeah, but it's like, but it's like, but like for instance, like there's that moment in issue 2 where Bridget is looking for the slug slime, and she
Oh
goes to see
yeah.
that little boy who's maybe like
This-
12.
oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
right. And the
yeah,
kid doesn't he say like he's like you have to kiss me or something, right?
yeah, you can kiss me, but what happens is that he like, but he squeezes her tit. Is what happens,
Yes.
and she like backs up like, "Whoa, kid, whoa!" And he's just like, "That's what you get. You let me do this, or I fucking tell my parents you broke in here." And I was kind of like, "This is some weird kind of like Porky's type of shit going on in this comic. How did you let that slide, woman?" But
Oh, shit.
there's also some weird kind of like extra heavy kind of flirtation between the Tempest Fugit, the Freud head, and Bridget. It's like
Right.
it's a little uncomfortable. I think,
Yeah.
like, for her as a character, and I also feel like, some of those pages. This is like a knock on the book, is that I feel like a lot of the stuff with Bridget, when she's with the head and they're talking about stuff, is like unnecessary because she's not doing
Yeah.
anything for the story. She's not
Right.
advancing. It's just straight up exposition of
There's
her thinking,
yes.
or
Yes.
philosophical exposition too. And I was kind of like, I don't know if you need this in this
Oh
book.
man, if we read some of the double page spreads from issue 2 or 3 of Bridget just talking to the Sigmund Freud head, we would be here for like 15 minutes just reading a double page spread. Like the
Yeah,
amount of dialogue is like mind blowing, and a lot of it is largely just straight up exposition and philosophizing. And yeah, I would agree. It was tough to get through some of that. I'm just reading here the description. They have kind of like a little log line of the story in this solicitation, this like press release for the new collection. And it says, first published by Eclipse Comics in 1984, Aztec Ace is an action packed intellectual time travel adventure starring Kaza, a.k.a. Ace, as he travels between the Aztec Empire and his home in the 23rd century. Ace, along with his pupil, Bridget Chronopoulos, and his navigator, Head, the floating disembodied head of Sigmund Freud, struggles to save his dimension from time paradoxes created by his enemy, the mysterious Nine Crocodile. Yeah, so they make that sound like, okay, like, all right, that's a story, but like that one or two sentences there doesn't even begin to describe the
tell
sheer
you what it is.
oddness
No,
and the
well,
madness of this storytelling.
I mean, like it's like trying to describe like a cure to somebody in like a sentence. And you're
Yeah,
like, I don't know if I can
yeah,
do it in a sentence. I mean, I can tell you what it is in a sentence, but it does no justice to what the story is really about. And you just and
yeah,
you might be like, why is everyone going crazy over Akira? It doesn't sound that cool. Or like you reading this, you're like, I'm reading AZTEC ACE. It doesn't sound that interesting. I mean, look, it's interesting because, and Doug Moench done this. He does this in a lot of his books. He injects a level of philosophy
oh
that
yeah,
he and the level of the volume of it, I think, depends on who's publishing it. Like I said, that one line where he was like, the loss of one woman makes the salvation of history insignificant. If you think about that, just the way that's
yeah,
kind of like designed as a
yeah.
sentence, it's kind of a strange sentence design, but it tells you a lot about like the stuff that he's kind of preoccupied like with this story, and it's kind of like that in Six from Sirius 2 or Six from Cyrus 2. I don't know how to pronounce that, and there's no one correcting me because
I
I've
think I
never
think
heard
it's
anyone.
a I think it's serious. I think it's I
Serious
believe
Cyrus? I think it's Six from
yeah,
Sirius 2.
it is. Yeah, I think it's serious. I think it's 6 from Sirius.
Yeah,
Um
I don't know.
wow.
I
I
don't
I'm
know.
I'm noticing just here that Doug Moench has done quite a lot of podcast interviews, and I'm like suddenly fascinated to actually go listen to a couple of these because I'd like to hear Doug Moench talk about Aztec Ace. I'm very
Yeah,
curious
so
to
would
hear
I.
his kind of thoughts.
So
You know
would
what I
I.
mean? I just want to hear what he was thinking.
But to me,
Yeah.
but to me, to me, to me, if he was really dope, you know what he would do? He'd pull the Stanley Kubrick and he'd be like, the work speaks for itself. I got nothing to say to you. I ain't
Oh
gonna
shit!
explain
I
shit.
hope he says
I ain't
that.
gonna explain shit. If he said that, that would be
Oh
hilarious to me because he'd be like, "What do
yeah,
you mean, dude? You were honestly honest." And he's like, just read the book and let me know what you think, because what you think is
yeah.
more important than what I wrote. For you, because it's all
Right,
about
right.
it's all about how you engage with the work as opposed to what the artist is trying to like tell you.
Yeah. Oh,
So
absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, I having said what you just said too, I will completely reserve the right to change my mind on Aztec Ace and say that it's one of my favorite comics. If I read the next 11 issues and suddenly all the puzzle pieces that you were talking about click into space, I mean, maybe this is like what I loved so much about the Invisibles, because the Invisibles is like one of my favorite comics of
all
all
time,
time. Yeah,
yes,
all time. Might be
great,
my favorite comic of all time. Like I
great.
adore the Invisibles. But like this is like the entire freaking like 5-year run of the Invisibles, and like however many issues the Invisibles was, like 70 issues or something, compressed maybe into like 15 issues. And so maybe I am going to love this once I understand it better and am able to take it in at my own pace. I don't know. So I reserve the right to kind of update my opinion on Aztec Ace. But for right now, like, I'm blown away by the artwork of Dan Day, genuinely blown away. And I'm also blown away by the ambition and just the sort of the originality and the sheer oddness of the ideas of Doug Moench. And, you know, Mensch had a legendary career, so he's a fascinating writer. The breadth of his work is enormous. He did so many legendary runs on books, and this is kind of an outlier in a certain way because it's way outside his mainstream work, and so it's very very fascinating to kind of be able to explore, like you say, the unfiltered, unrestrained, unshackled Doug Moench.
I think you're I think you're underserving him by saying this is the unfiltered, unrestrained defense, because he's pitching like a no hitter here in a way that I think that people coming up to bat are expecting to hit these easy fastballs, and he's like, nope, here's a whole bunch of knuckleballs that I got some grease on the ball too, so you're really never gonna hit this thing unless you're really good. But I still think I go back to what I said earlier. It just requires a level of focus. And I
Yeah.
feel like you could focus. As soon as you bring up the Invisibles, it's a book that like I've probably read those issues a few times when it was coming out. Like I would read an issue more than once, like before the next one came out. You know,
Yeah.
I haven't revisited the book in maybe since I don't know, maybe a couple years after it stopped, because I actually don't know where all those issues are, and I would love to get a collected version of that and go back and reread the whole thing, because if I remember correctly, the first three issues of that book were really hard to
Yeah,
comprehend.
yeah. No, honestly, the first storyline of Invisibles is a little bit Aztec AC. It's where like you're way far back in the past, and it starts actually no, not the very first run. The second run is the second story arc that they do is like it's a very difficult story arc that almost crashed and burned the sales of the book. But it's like the second arc is very difficult, but then with the third arc and beyond, like I think Grant goes to great lengths to try to make the series more accessible in different ways. And the final run of it, like the final 12 issues, but drawn by Phil Jimenez, is probably the most accessible
Fantastic.
version. Yeah, it's really like more like it's kind of a shocking mashup of Grant Morrison's ideas with a much more mainstream kind of accessible art style, and it's like really amazing. And I think Frank Quitely draws the last issue of the Invisibles, so it's one,
Yeah.
you know, it's another one of those Morrison Quitely collaborations. But that whole run of that book, I mean, we could do a multi-part episode about that book because that's just like it's an amazing,
Trying to
amazing
think,
piece of work.
did Phil Bond do any work on that?
Yeah, I think he might have done a couple issues, maybe.
Like Phil
I
was
think he
like
did.
the 20s, like the
Yeah,
20s, something like that.
he might have
There
done
was
some
some.
issues for sure. There were a lot of artists who kind of came and went on that. You know, it started with Steve Yowell, the English
Yeah,
artist, and then Jill Thompson, I believe, illustrated that more
yeah,
difficult
she did
second arc.
some. Yeah,
Yeah. And a lot of people popped in. I think Tommy Lee Edwards, I think did a small amount, maybe one or two issues on it. And then there were a bunch of other artists that like just throughout the
I thought,
run.
I thought Tommy Lee Edwards did that one. Like there was that Vertigo Zero or something like that, or that little. There was like a Vertigo sampler that I think
Oh,
Tommy
sure.
Lee Edwards. Yeah, that Tommy Lee Edwards did the art on that too. Because I
Oh,
remember that sampler.
was it like a sampler with an invisible story?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, I
Yeah.
don't remember when that. I mean, like how that fit into the chronology. That's why I want to get the trade to go. I mean, probably is there a hardcover for that thing? You think? I
Invisibles?
don't think, yeah.
Yeah, there is. There is. There's actually a massive. There's a couple I think they've done. There's one that came out I think fairly recently that's just a massive like omnibus hardcover of the whole Invisibles in one hardcover. However, as like, you know, people will probably be sick of hearing me say on the show, Chris, I must advise you to instead consider reading the original issues because Grant does the letter columns
I know
himself,
they're
and
great.
and
No,
they are phenomenal. The letter columns are fucking bonkers.
well,
Yeah.
I mean, look. I have that whole run of issues.
Mm.
Like I said, I mean, I read it. That was the first stuff of Grant Morrison's that I ever read. That stuff
Oh
made me a
wow.
fan. That
Oh.
made me a fan of his. And I think a lot of it was because he was doing the letter column, and it was just
Right. Oh yeah. Oh, you got
great.
such a sense for his
Yeah,
personality. Yeah.
personality. Travel around the world, getting sick of India, and like
Yeah,
having
yeah,
to get
yeah. Almost died. Yeah.
it was all this kind of wild shit that he's talking about. I was like, no one. I was like, wait a minute. You're not holed up in London or holed up in New York or the States, right? You're like on the road
You're
traveling.
in fucking Kathmandu, and you actually
Yeah,
look like King Mob. What the fuck?
and you're fucking sending the comic script to people by fax. I'm assuming. I mean, I like I don't know how the book was even like
Well,
published.
you know what it was too is I believe, if I recall, Grant took the money that he made from Arkham Asylum, which was very significant because at the time that Arkham Asylum hardcover was released, which Dave McKean, of course, painted, it came out around the time of the original Batman movie, and that Arkham Asylum hardcover was at the time, I believe, the best-selling graphic novel of all time up until that
Wow.
point. Like it was an enormous seller for DC. And I believe the Grant Morrison's royalty checks off that were extremely generous. And from what I recall, he had the money to go travel the world for a year or two, which is exactly what he did. And so
Yeah.
he went off and just had a bunch of adventures. And like you said, I guess was turning in comic scripts, however one would have done it at that time, traveling in the
Fax.
like
He had
pre-computer
to,
era. Yeah.
yeah, he'd have to fax those to the offices, because
Yeah.
or telex. No, a fax. He'd have to fax them. That's the only way you could do it. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, he could send it FedEx, DHL, but that would have been a lot of money, and the fax wouldn't have been cheap either, because it's a long distance phone call for like 10, 20 minutes. You know, to send all that
Hmm.
data. But he probably didn't care because he was getting
Yeah.
paid, and probably business expense and all this other kind of shit. So you know, I mean, wow, wow. But
Yeah, I mean
anyway,
there are many issues of the Invisibles that read as if they were written by someone who is gobbling mushrooms in Kathmandu and in between adventures, like stopped for a few hours in a cafe to bang out an issue of the Invisibles. And that's kind of what I love about the book is it has a real seat of its pants kind of quality to it, where some issues are better than others, but like when it's great, it's like brilliant and it's never boring and it's always just like
right, it's
a
never
very
boring. You know,
unique, like really unique experience. Like it just never felt like any other comic.
yeah, yeah. We should definitely do a thing on that. We'll definitely, yeah,
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to our final thoughts on Aztec Ace. I guess you know I would say get the original issues if you can. I'm sure that you know, but if you don't like to do that, then could go to Amazon and pre-order. Probably by the time you've heard this, is probably no longer a pre-order. But you know, buy it and read it, and you know, or I mean, you know what? You probably get issues 1, 2, and 3 online somewhere, and you just read those and see if you want to buy the $75 for the hardcover. Just see if you want to expend that kind of money. You know, like me personally, I'm toying with it in my head right now. The only trepidation I have is just like is bookshelf space, because otherwise I would get it, but I gotta like, you know, I gotta manage all that right now. But yeah, I mean, look, you know, it was an interesting read, is crazy read. I still feel someone could redo this and make it like work into like like Aztec S2, like Aztec Ace 2.0, and make it really accessible and like and rousing and you know, in a way that most comics aren't that, because there's so many ideas in this that if you parse it out like over enough issues, you know, I think people would find it fascinating. Whereas just now it's a little like it's a challenge, and it's because it's so dense. Not that it's a bad challenge, but it just is dense.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's totally accurate. And it's, I mean, it's 100% worth checking out. And I think you can see from the list of artists who were contributing to the Kickstarter, like it was a book that was clearly influential and is fondly remembered. And yeah, it's absolutely worth experiencing.
For sure.
It's an utterly unique and mind expanding and mind blowing piece of work. And like so many of the comics that we just absolutely really dig from the 80s, like it doesn't have to be entirely successful on every single level to be an incredibly worthwhile comic. You know, like it's something that's just like one big giant swing, and it's just an audacious piece of work that is so singular. I mean, where else are you ever going to get a story like this? Like, you should check it out just to experience it. And I am going to finish reading the series. It just might take me like a year to get through the remaining 12 issues, but I'm going to do it.
No, it's more than 15 issues. Is it
Is it
30
only 50?
issues?
Why did they only collect 15 then for the hardcover? I'm confused. Let me
I
clarify that, because I thought the same thing you did, that there were more issues, but then the hardcover is only 15. So yeah, maybe
it
the
could be.
hardcover is like, is it volume one? Are they going to be doing a second one?
I mean, it's 400 some pages. So I mean, like, 15 issues is kind of the maximum you could get out of a. I mean, get out of a hardcover, right?
I mean, I think some of those Marvel Omnibuy have more, but I mean, maybe it depends on the binding and whatnot, I suppose.
Well,
Um,
no, well that's the thing. Look, like I got that Legion, the 5 years later thing as an omnibus. It's fucking
yeah,
huge. It's massive. It's probably 30
yeah,
issues. So that's over
that's what I'm
600
saying.
pages.
Right.
But I think the cost of that would be prohibitive.
Oh,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah. No,
you
you're
know.
probably right. That could absolutely be what it is. No, Aztec Ace, I'm looking it up on Wikipedia. 15 issues appeared from 84 to 85. The series ended abruptly, leaving several storylines unresolved. The characters reappeared in the 88 Total Eclipse crossover miniseries. And other contributors to Aztec Ace, aside from Doug Moench and Dan Day, were, of course, Nestor Redondo, Ron Harris, Mike Gustovich, Tom Yeats, Philip DeWalt, Steve Oliff, later Spawn colorist, apparently came in and colored some Aztec Ace. That's crazy. Also colorist Sam Parsons, letterer Carrie Spiegel, and editing it all was Kat Ironwood, and of course the logo created by Dennis McFarlane. That's the full credits for the whole series.
Okay, so
I
okay, so,
It was 15 issues. I don't know. I've had the same impression you did, though, for some reason. I really did think it was more issues as well. But so there you go. That's it. Mystery solved. They apparently published the whole run, or they apparently
right,
collected the whole run,
the
rather.
whole run. Okay, so $75 is not that's not that bad for hardcover like that. I mean, look, like most of these comics. That's the thing, right? You know what it is? I bet you those omnibuses from Marvel and DC, they probably do a print run that's enough to bring the cost down. And
Yes.
I think that maybe they don't have the print run ability to bring the cost down for the initial run for these indie books. Like, particularly a Kickstarter thing, what are they going to do? Like 1,000? Probably need 5,000 or
Yeah.
10,000 to bring it down, right? And they're probably only doing a few hundred, if
Yeah.
that. So that's probably why But anyway, I mean, you said an interesting thing. I want to say one last thing
Yeah.
before we get out of here. It's a big swing, and that the book doesn't have to be 100% right. I think that the bar on books now is that they've really got to kick on all cylinders because their stories are slighter. And I feel
Right.
like a book from the 80s or even the early 90s, you could have stuff that's a little like, discombobulated or not as engaging because there were so many other things that were fascinating about it. I mean, like you're not striking out the way people strike out now. Like the book is good or it's bad. Like there's no, what I'm saying? It's so, I like the books are so binary now.
Yeah, yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah. And to me, that's boring and that's bullshit. Cause like that's what I loved about comics, in the 80s as a kid and everything, was just that like there was such a variety of people just trying wild shit. And I didn't care if it was all successful. You know what I mean? It's like back when comics were more affordable too. It's like you get a whole stack of comics, you come home and like, yeah, they're not all fucking home runs, but who cares? Like it's like more like the velocity of ideas that are coming at you. And these books, a lot of them are coming out monthly. It's just like you respect people taking their shots and then kind of moving on. And like,
Yeah.
I think there's this idea now that like a comic has to be perfect, like you say, or that it's like preserved in amber because for a lot of people it's just a fucking movie pitch waiting to happen. And like, oh, you want to put your best foot forward and you want to like shave off the edges and make it all just like perfect, like as if it's like your screenplay you're presenting out to investors or something. Like you want it to somehow be like this platonic ideal of a perfect story, but that's to me never what comics was about. Comics was about just fucking batshit wild imagination exploding on the page with a deadline and like knowing that you have to fucking do another story the next week and like you're going to do the best you can that day. And I don't know, like I feel like a lot of my favorite comics have that kind of, I don't want to call it a slapdash quality, but like a quality of like the quality of somebody like Doug Moench, who's probably like, well, shit, I got to write an issue of Batman this week. I got to write an issue of Master Kung Fu. I got to write all these other things. So I'm going to give AZTEC ACE a few days and come up with the best thing I can and throw everything I got at it and then move on to the next thing. I feel like, to me, like, I enjoy that quality of comics, and I feel like you see that a lot more in the 80s of people that were they were taking their shot, but they weren't necessarily, they weren't thinking about everything as like this thing that was going to be collected in a collected edition and was going to live forever. They were just fucking writing stories, and like there was like a purity to it that was different. It also wasn't a springboard to a movie or a TV show. It was just like, hey, what's a wild comic story? You know what I mean? Like, what's a wild comic story I'm passionate about? Like, Steve Gerber wasn't trying to launch a fucking movie franchise. He was just like, fuck, man, like Howard the Duck, this is a crazy idea. I'm going to go for it. Like, you had so much more wild invention without an agenda. And to me, that's why like we're doing the show, really, is because like we love these comics because of that spirit.
I think I never thought of it that way, but you said great things like the velocity of ideas. I mean, like I remember I was going through a box the other day, and I ran across this Night Force comic that like fucking Gene Colan did the art on. And
Gene Colan, like, yeah. That's like fucking. I saw just online a couple of days ago. Coincidentally, that comic just had its 40-year anniversary. Literally, issue 1 came out 40 years ago.
But I'm reading that, and I'm looking at those, and I'm kind of saying, you would never do this comic today.
No way. No.
I mean, it's a great comic and everything. Like the characters are really cool, but it was kind of like you wouldn't do a comic like this today. And I feel like you said, like everything has got like like everything now has to have like this 10x return. And back then they was, because look, we talked about Thriller, right? Like Thriller went what 13, 14 issues or something like that, and it was considered a failure the entire run. But they kept, but it was enough for them to like, it was selling enough for them to let it run for a little bit. Whereas now they're pulling a book after 3 issues if it doesn't work, You're just like, oh, we're done. We're not. We made a mistake on this.
And let's be real. They wouldn't even launch a book like Thriller in the first place at like most companies, or really, it's just too. It's too out there.
Wild. Yeah, but a lot of books, but those are the books that you read them as a kid and go, "What is this?"
Yeah.
Oh my god, this is like wow. Let me pick it up, because right now, like, I never go to the comic store. And like, well, not the never, but I go to the comic store. Let me take this. Let me back this all back up. I go to the comic store now where I'm looking for a book that'll make me go, "What is this?" I never expected any of this. We were talking the other day about that book called New Burn, and the book called The New Masters. Which I think are two interesting books right now that I think that like I just saw them.
Image comics.
Yeah, I think that the New Masters, I think those guys like won some image kind of like image diversity award creator thing or something like a couple years ago. Now here's a book that's coming out finally. I think that's what it is, because it's something about their name, these two African guys. I remember they won something. And so here's the book. And I was like, okay, cool. Let me take a look at this. And it's like pleasantly surprised. Because, I didn't expect any of this, but most stuff you look at, and look at it and look at the title and look at the art and look at what's going on. I was like, I can kind of not tell this is like, it's not going to surprise me,
Yes.
It's not really going to surprise me. But yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway.
It's true.
That is this week's episode of Comics Rot Your Brain. We thank you for listening to the show. We'll be back next week with a comic that you've probably never heard of or forgot about. I'm not sure what that is yet, but we will know what it is. No, we'll just surprise you, or when the episode drops, to see what it is in the title.
Exactly, and one of these days, we also might get around to interviewing some creators or some editors or publishers from this era, and we might also be having a special guest or two join us on the show soon to discuss some of their favorite 80s comics. So stay tuned for some curveballs coming up soon.
All right, everyone. Thank you. Talk soon.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.